Can anyone else believe that Final Fantasy XVI was announced just a bit ago? The 16th Final Fantasy game. Well, that's not actually correct. I mean, the main series has 16 numbered games, but when you add in the sequels for 10 and 13, the many games surrounding the stories of 7 and 15, and the spin-off series like Crystal Chronicles and Tactics, things get complicated. As someone who has only played 2 spin-off games and 1 main series game, I can't really imagine how intimidating and frustrating it would be to try to fully jump into a series as complicated as this one. I can, however, describe how intimidating and frustrating it is to get into another famous video game series. I guess by comparison, The Legend of Zelda doesn't seem even remotely as intimidating a series as Final Fantasy, as it only has around 20 main games, but my frustrations in trying to get into Zelda come from the lack of accessibility. First off, there's a confusing official timeline that gets split 3 ways depending on whether the hero wins or loses in Ocarina of Time, which means that some of the games are from parallel universes or something? Look, I don't really understand it, but some fans think the series should be played in an order corresponding with the timeline. But some fans think you should just play them in the order they were released, and some think you should play in any order as long as you play some specific games back to back because they're technically sequels. It's already confusing, but you also have to consider that these games weren't all released on PC. If you wanted to play every main Zelda game, you'd have to have at least a Wii U, Nintendo Switch, and 3DS, so good luck with that. Although I do want to say, consoles and confusing timelines aside, my biggest complaint with getting into The Legend of Zelda is that not all the games are created equally. They aren't all direct copies of each other. Some are quick and straight into the action, where others are, quite frankly, pretty slow to start. I've only played 3 of the Zelda games in the past, and both Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword have fairly slow starts, and creepy spiders, that made me disinterested in playing, so I stopped. But that one other game, Link's Awakening DX, got me a little more interested, and though I never really got that far, it definitely stayed on my mind, enough to get the remake when it came out for the Switch. And what I got with the remake honestly surprised me. I expected to get an hour in and want to drop the game, but an hour turned into several hours, which turned into an entire day, and I really wanted to keep playing. Adorable graphics, fantastic music, and fun gameplay lured me in, but it was the rewarding exploration aspect that kept me playing all the way to the end. So, whether you're brand new to The Legend of Zelda and not sure where to start, a lover of the Zelda series who can't get enough, or just someone looking for a cute game that's incredibly fun to play, you should play The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening is an action-adventure game developed and published by Nintendo and released in 1993 for the Game Boy. Link's Awakening is also a remake of said title, developed by Grezzo and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo Switch in 2019. The game starts with Link sailing a boat through a storm, being struck by lightning, and eventually waking up in an unfamiliar house surrounded by unfamiliar people. As it turns out, Link is washed ashore on Koholint Island, and will only be able to leave if he wakes the legendary Windfish after gathering 8 instruments of the Sirens. And so our legendary hero sets out on another legendary quest. Honestly, the main reason I wanted to frame this game as a great entry to the Zelda universe is because its story stands alone. Well, most every Zelda game stands alone, but in Link's Awakening, there's no talk about the Triforce or the evil Ganondorf. The whole story takes place on Koholint Island with the characters on Koholint Island, and your one goal is to wake the Windfish. While this goal seems especially strange, the story turns into a sort of bittersweet one in the end. You get pretty close to some of the island's inhabitants, especially Marin, the girl who brought you back from the beach after you were shipwrecked, and leaving this beautiful island and all these colorful characters begins to feel more and more sad as you play. The characters themselves are pretty simple, which isn't to say that they're bad. The main characters, Marin, Tarin, the Owl, and Old Man Ulrira, who serves as the hint function in the game, are pretty talkative and really grow throughout the story. On the other hand, the rest of the characters only have a handful of lines, so the game uses environmental storytelling to give you a better idea of who they really are. These characters are also equipped with very terse dialogue, which practically screams, "The original game was on the Game Boy, so we needed to save memory." But instead of coming off as being snarky or mean, it makes a lot of the characters seem kind of shy and sweet. The story and characters get tied up into one small, simple package, but don't let that package deceive you on the value inside. Things get a bit more complex when it comes to the gameplay, and I mean that in the best way possible. It starts off pretty simple with your sword. Slash at enemies to damage and kill them, and to clear certain obstacles in your path. Picking up a shield also lets you get into a specific rhythm with each enemy, where you can determine when to block their attacks and when to attack them back. Adding in all the rest of the items you can get throughout the game makes things complicated. The Rock's Feather lets you jump over small gaps, the Pegasus Boots let you dash over larger gaps, bombs, the hook shot, and your bow and arrows let you attack enemies in different ways, and certain enemies can only be hurt by certain items, so as you gather new items, you have to remember the different attack patterns necessary to take down specific baddies. Most of the significant items you find in dungeons, which make up a large part of the gameplay. There are 9, technically 10, dungeons in the game, 8 of which hold the instruments of the sirens you're looking for, and they're pretty formulaic, but not in a bad way. When you walk in and start exploring, you'll have access to about half the dungeon, and in these areas you can pick up your map and compass, which let you see how big the dungeon is and where the chests and locked doors are in said dungeons. I've seen these items in other Zelda games, but I had never experienced the stone beak, which you can place in stone owl statues around the dungeon. These statues then give you tips and hints about puzzles within the dungeon, which is a great feature that helps the player out without totally giving away the solution to the puzzle. For my part, I only had to look up a couple of solutions in playing the game, and for the most part it was just because I was being super unobservant. At some point in the dungeon, you'll find an item that lets you navigate the second half of the dungeon and go on to beat the boss. While this dungeon formula may sound a bit boring, I found that each dungeon had me traversing around quite a bit to solve different puzzles and to get access to different rooms. You really have no idea what to expect with each new room, so exploration is key. The dungeons are fun, but exploring the expansive overworld was what really got me hooked on this game. Koholint isn't all green plains and dark dungeons. There's also the desert, swamp, mountains, lakes, and even an entire castle to explore. I really like that the island didn't feel like a straight line. Parts of the island are blocked off from the beginning until you pop out of a dungeon with a new item that lets you traverse new terrain. But these obstacles are all over the place, so the world still feels open. Even if you can't get to a new place, you're constantly rewarded for exploring. It's so fun to just see a suspicious area or interesting nook, check it out, and get a piece of heart, which helps increase Link's health, or a secret seashell, which helps you get a variety of rewards, the most notable being an upgraded sword. Another fantastic explorative aspect of Link's Awakening is the trading or fetch quest. I realize that many gamers might find this statement surprising, but before I clarify, let me just define a fetch quest for anyone unfamiliar with the term. A fetch quest is a quest in a game that requires a player to constantly trade random or useless items with various non-playable characters in order to finally receive an incredibly useful item at the end of the quest. Now, in most games, these quests are just plain annoying, but in Link's Awakening, the quest really works because of how often the player is revisiting areas that they've already been to. Either you hear from a character that they are in need of an item and know exactly where to go when you finally get it, or you have no idea who needs the item you have, so you eagerly race to new areas and talk to everyone in hopes of finding who needs it. In the end, the item you get encourages you to explore even more to get new goodies and surprises, and even helps to reveal some interesting secrets. Link's Awakening also features some extra bits of gameplay that are perfect for taking breaks from exploring. There's the trendy crane game where Link can pick up various items, then there's the area where you can fish. Fishing gives you various rewards, mostly rupees, which you can take back to the crane game for another play, and a fairy bottle hidden at the bottom. You can also earn different lures to more easily reel in different fish, and in between catching the fish you can go play the crane game again. There's also the dungeon creating aspect over at Dompe's place, where you can create your own dungeons from chambers from the dungeons you've already been in, and after you go through those dungeons you can head on back to the crane game. Okay, fine, I absolutely understand that not everybody is going to love the crane game, since it uses some strange physics and can be a bit finicky. But as someone who is positively addicted to crane games, I was absolutely addicted to this one, and I actually got disappointed when I would come back and not find anything new. Back to the fishing and dungeon creating areas, the fishing pond is fun but can get tough, and mostly becomes a place to get new records. Making your own dungeons is pretty fun, but I wish it let you have a bit more control in actually making the separate rooms, as traversing through the same rooms over and over can become tiring. One thing that absolutely never wore on me was the aesthetic. Yeah, I'll say it, I was mainly attracted to playing this game because of how freaking adorable it is, and I have no regrets. The whole landscape and every single character and enemy looks like a kid's toy, and it's just so nice to look at, in a world where so many other games are trying to become as realistic looking as possible, or as brown and sad looking as possible. The aesthetic is like a breath of fresh air, and I love it. The music and sound design in this game is also fantastic, surprising nobody. I mean, come on, it's Zelda. Kind of known for the good tunes, right? I love that the music seemed to match with the aesthetic while still feeling very Zelda and, at plenty of times, very dramatic. The sound effects were also fantastic, and while none of them really jumped out at me to talk about here, that's mostly because I was so dang immersed in the experience that the sound practically held me captive, preventing me from pulling myself out of the game to really think about sound design. The entire aesthetic of this game became the perfect little bow on this simple, unassuming package of an experience. Any attempt to explain the best parts of Link's Awakening feels strangely like underselling it. It's just a cute, fun game with a wonderful but simple story, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're someone who really wants to get into the series, a fan who skipped out on this entry, or even a Zelda critic, Link's Awakening is too much fun to miss.